Noah Cuatro, an absolutely gorgeous little boy, was known to the Department of Children and Family Services in Los Angeles from the very moment that he was born. He was taken away from his parents almost immediately after his birth, and it goes without saying that that very sad start to his life is something that essentially formed the rest of his life. And his fate was essentially sealed when the caseworker who'd looked after him very, very well for a period of time was taken off his case and accused of picking on his family. This resulted in a devastating case that, in my opinion, could have prevented the death of an absolutely gorgeous little boy. It's crazy that there are agencies out there who are supposed to protect children who actually add to the horrific realities that lead to the loss of their lives. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's case is one that I wanted to cover for a range of reasons. I know that lots of you who follow me on this channel understand that I worked in safeguarding for 2 decades, and therefore child protection is something that I am absolutely obsessed by. But equally, I am obsessed by how many failures happen time and time and time again that lead to people like me having to cover these cases, because we have to give a voice to those who become voiceless. And today's case is absolutely one that evidences that fully on a huge range of levels. If you're new to my channel and you're just hearing from me for the first time, my content is always crime related. I release my content twice a week on the same days, Wednesdays and Sundays. If you like crime and consistency, this is a channel for you. I do also drop extra videos though. So if you want to know exactly when I'll be releasing these, why don't you get your notifications on and subscribe? Then you won't ever miss an episode should you wish to watch them. Let's talk about Noah Cuatro and the beginnings that essentially led to the story that I'm going to talk about today. Noah was born to his parents, Ursula Juarez and Jose Cuatro. They'd actually met at John F. Kennedy High School. This is where they had both been attending as students, and they had obviously formed a romance. Sadly, it's a diabolical romance. Let's just talk about that from the get-go. We're talking about 2 very ill-equipped human beings, both emotionally with the maturity rate of, I don't know, a gestating fetus, and these 2 connect. And we all know that when these kind of alliances and allegiances begin, often it simply forecasts future-wise the most horrendous outcomes. And that's exactly where this case is going today. When Noah was born, he did have an older sibling, an older brother. He also went on to have a younger sister and another brother. Noah was literally taken away from his parents whilst they were still in hospital after his birth. And the reason for this is because Juarez was suspected of abusing a 10-month-old little girl. So from the get-go, we're talking about parents who are abusive in nature. And I have such frustrations with this case for lots of reasons that I promise will eventuate down the line. And I know that you'll feel exactly the same about this case as I do. The failures are enormous. But to be somebody who's got pregnant and had another baby when you are already being accused of abusing a 10-month-old little girl is horrifying. She'd apparently been in Juarez's care and she'd sustained a fractured skull during the time that she was with her. Now, this means that Noah's taken away, placed in foster care, and there is a really high bar for doing that. So let's just be clear. The reality is that unfortunately, there are many unwanted children. There are many abused children. So the system, as much as it is completely imperfect and has massive problems, some of which we'll identify today, certainly isn't looking to have lots of more children placed in foster care, because they already have an enormous amount and struggle to deal with that. So to arrive in a position of foster care, there have been problems within your family that have met that bar, and it's a high bar. So he's placed into foster care initially, but then fortunately after a few months, his great-grandmother, Evangelina Hernandez, she's known as Eva throughout this case, she managed to gain custody of him. And Eva is lovely. Eva is what every child wants in their life. She's loving, she's compassionate, she's empathic, she's dedicated, she's committed, and she's absolutely 100% able, willing, and certainly the best person to take care of Noah. Now, we get to May 2015. This is when Noah's 9 months of age. So that's a big time away from his biological parents, but nonetheless, he gets returned to the care of his parents. And the main reason for this is that alleged abuse that has been levied against Juarez, it wasn't able to be proven. So with that, that means there's no essential case to answer, and that means that he can be placed back with the biological parents. But that time between Noah being absent from his parents' care to when he's returned, it's really had an impact. It's taken its toll on their relationship. It highly affects their connection with their son. And Eva, great-grandmother in this, said, listen, they genuinely didn't bond with him at all. I will argue it's because neither of the adult parents in this case have the capacity to bond with anything other than their own egos. But I grant you, Eva's probably being a little bit more sympathetic and compassionate by extending a belief that maybe it's to do with the fact that they didn't have the opportunity to bond, and that maybe if they had, this wouldn't have played out. But like I said, that's because Eva's far nicer than I am when it comes down to judging these individuals. We get to November 2016. Kaiser Permanente, who's a doctor, he reported that Noah, basically, as far as he was concerned, was being neglected. He'd not turned up for his last 8 doctor's appointments. And bear in mind, this family have been in the line of DCFS's fire for a while. They are certainly not individuals that are considered great parents. They are people that they want to make sure are doing a good job when it comes down to Noah, particularly when you think about the start that he had in life. And they're not doing. They're not following any protocol. They're not agreeing to take him to any of his appointments. They are basically removing him from the watchful eye of the medical system that can protect him. And that's concerning the doctor, and the doctor does absolutely the correct thing and notes that down. Now, when this report's investigated and Noah's checked on, this neglect that the doctor is suspecting is 100% confirmed. So it's actually put in the notes that Noah is very thin with hollow eyes. Now, any parent out there, if you have a child who's very thin with hollow eyes, they're either in hospital being treated for something pretty awful, or there's really big problems at home. If you are a caring parent, without a doubt, before they get to that stage, you will have got them into medical care and provision because clearly they're not well. If you haven't done, it's because you're abusive. End of. Now, it's found at this point that he weighed just 17 pounds. 17 pounds. This is ridiculous. And since February 2015, he's literally only gained a few ounces. So that is ludicrous. He should be gaining weight appropriately and in line with what's expected for children of his age. And he's not. He's woefully underweight. Bear in mind as well, he's not able to walk at this point. He's 27 months old as well. So at 27 months of age, you should absolutely be walking. Of course, children develop at different points. So some children will walk at 9 months, some children will walk at 2 years. But 27 months, it's past where we expect enormously. And also when you add to that, the reality of the way that he looks, clearly something is amiss. Also, his muscles were hypertonic. Now, hypertonic means that they're stiff and they've got a decreased range of movement. He was considered developmentally delayed and he was considered to be failing to thrive. I would say the words failing to thrive is a woeful underestimation when we're talking about this case. He isn't failing to thrive, he's essentially dying. And had they been left to their own devices, he would have died if this situation had not improved because he was basically starving. Now, Juarez and Cuatro, they try to explain this. Of course they do. They've got an answer for everything. And throughout this case, of course, they'll have an answer for everything. They try to justify the situation. They say that Noah would just overeat and then he'd make himself sick. So Noah, 27 months old, bulimic. Now, bear in mind, I specialised in eating disorders. In fact, my master's degree was in eating disorders. I have a near obsession with the way that we develop our associations with food. And I have worked with people who are young with bulimia and anorexia bulimia and anorexia nervosa. I have done that work. And I'm telling you now, never ever have I met a child of 27 months who is purposefully and willfully eating so much that they are violently sick and therefore they are losing weight. What I can tell you is I have worked with children who've been horrendously abused, who are starved, and then they eat as much as they can because they're aware that that next meal might not come, and then they may indeed be sick. But what is most notable is that when this is a persistent cycle, it's because they are not being given food, full stop. And I would definitely suggest that he is being starved at this moment in time, because the truth is, the only people that these parents care about are themselves. They also said that the reason he wasn't going to doctor's appointments was because they had insurance problems. Obviously, in the States, there is a payment system, and in the UK, that's very different. We have the NHS. But even though they're telling this story, it's a lie, because it's found that Noah genuinely had always been covered for his medical expenses. Now, fortunately, at this point, the right decision is made, and he's immediately taken away from his parents. They are clearly not giving him even the basic level of care. We're not even getting to minorly adequate. We're talking about completely inadequate care of him. And when he's first put back into the system, back into care, he's sent to the Pomona facility, which is a facility in San Gabriel Valley for medically fragile children. And he does really well. He recovers, he gains weight, but just put that into context. He's been sent to a specific facility that is going to help him thrive, because that's how bad his life has been at home. Now, at this point, that child should never be going home. And I'm going to say that right from the get-go. I appreciate that people will be out there saying, well, parents should always be given a second, third, fourth gen. No, they shouldn't. Not when you have a history with these people who are clearly not fit to be parents. But the very fact that he's been sent to this facility to gain weight means that he could never be safe with those caregivers, in my opinion, and I'm sure everybody else would agree with me. Now, that stay at the Pomona facility doesn't just encourage him to thrive physically because he's eating well. His development starts to catch up. He's in a situation where people are looking after him, so he's starting to meet those milestones that he'd failed to meet under his parents' care. And one of the workers there said he wasn't quite caught up, but he was almost there. He was running around, he was sliding on the slide. He also, according to the worker Michelle Thompson, said he'd call himself No-No, and she forever remembered him as such a ham, as she put it, with this wild mop of brown hair and a sweet, sweet disposition. So he's a lovely, lovely child. Then he's placed in foster care to make sure that that thriving continues. Fortunately, in August 2017, a lovely decision is made. He gets to go back to live with his great-grandmother, Eva, once again. This is a place where he is so happy and he starts to thrive again. And occasionally, he would refer to Eva as his mummy because he's a kid who wants the mummy. And my goodness, Eva may be older in years than his biological parent, but she's also wiser and kinder and more loving and absolutely deserving of the title mummy. She's playing that role effectively and she's helping him along hugely. Now, apparently, when she was looking after him, one of the things that she recognised was that when he had to have supervised visits with his parents, he would constantly wet the bed. Immediately, we know what we're talking about here. We're talking about a trauma response. We're talking about a regression response. He doesn't want to go to his parents because bad things are happening at his parents. This is not a child who is happy when he's having to confront the reality of going and seeing his mother and father. And that should speak volumes about the kind of things that are happening to him when he is present with his biological parents. A child who is happy is not going to be wetting the bed at the idea of having to go and see his biological parents. And apparently he was incredibly resistant when he had to do that. He was really upset every time he had to do that. And it took time for him on his return to actually calm down and return to that state of peace that he experienced with Eva. We get to November 2018, and unbelievably, Noah is ordered by the court to be returned to his parents' custody. That is ludicrous. Basically, they said they didn't think he would be at a substantial risk to his safety if he was returned. Now, I don't know about you, but anybody who puts a child back because they don't believe that he would be at a substantial risk to his safety is basically saying, well, there might be some risk, there might be an average risk, but there's not an absolutely acute high risk to his safety, even though he's pretty much been starved to death prior to this situation of him being returned. So we've already seen a substantial risk to his safety, but now magically, apparently, that doesn't exist. We've already seen them neglect him on a range of levels, including making sure that he doesn't see healthcare providers. So we've noted that not only do they pose a substantial risk, they also avoid those protective mechanisms that prevent him in the future being at risk. But according to this miraculous reality that we're dealing with now, no longer is it a substantial risk, even though his parents are exactly the same people and he's returning to the same situation. So what's noted there is he might be at risk, but just not a huge risk. And that's enough to send him back. And Noah begged, literally begged his great-grandma. He said, "Don't send me back, Grandma." And Eva told the social workers he didn't want to leave her, he wanted to stay with her, that she wanted to keep him because she loved him and she could give him the care that he needed. And he was also recorded as saying, "This is my home, Grandma and Grandpa love me." But in spite of that, for Eva, it was heartbreaking because she was told that she had to send him back. She had no option to do that. She had to do what the court had ordered. No one can even begin to imagine how helpless she must have felt in that situation. Unless you've been there, it must be incomprehensible because she knows. She is not letting him down of her own volition, but she is letting him down because the court are ordering her to do so. She was providing everything he needed. She was providing him safety. But apparently, even though he's in a great place, he can be put at, some risk. And that's what they do. And that's why this story is going to take a horrific turn when we talk about what plays out. So she's being forced to send this vulnerable little boy who she adored back to people who mistreated him. So her heart is broken and his safety is fractured beyond belief. Now in February 2019, Noah's caseworker, who is brilliant, and I think, on this channel, we criticise where people need to be criticised. And caseworkers are people that we will absolutely hold to a high standard. They are there to look after the most vulnerable. And when they deserve to be brought down because of the way that they've acted and the lacklustre way that they've treated their cases, we always highlight that. But Susan Johnson is everybody's perfect caseworker. Literally. If you want to protect somebody, you would want Susan Johnson doing that job to protect because she does everything right. On the 7th of March 2019, though, on a well child visit, Noah is seen and he's diagnosed with an ear infection. He's given medication, but apparently at this appointment, his growth was within normal range. And bear in mind as well that a normal range growth-wise is a spectrum. So you can have people at the very beginning and at the very end. So underweight to overweight, you can just be above that and still be in normal range. So I would imagine that he's starting to lose weight, but he isn't highlighting in the red zone where people are called in because they're really concerned about the child, because he's been thriving, he's been with Eva. Around this same time frame, Maggie Hernandez calls the child abuse hotline regarding Noah's welfare. So she talks about the fact that Noah's, who is her niece's son, is losing weight and that his hair is getting thin. So she, as a family member, she's clearly very concerned about him and wants action to be taken. And it turns out as well that Noah has actually told one of his uncles that his butt was hurting. So at this point, sexual abuse is also suspected. And another thing that's changed is just his behaviour. Family members are noticing that he's become really nervous. Previously, he'd been really exuberant. And Maggie Hernandez says, when a child changes their demeanour like that, you've got to feel like something's going on. She said he was 4. Nobody was going to advocate for him. So the family are trying their best, along with the caseworker, to get it recognised that something terrible is playing out for Noah. It was also reported to the hotline that he wasn't being fed properly and he was having nightmares, which we would expect because they've starved him before. He's been desperately unhappy before. He wet the bed at the thought and prospect of going to see his parents. He is understandably in a position of psychological trauma and people are seeing it and reports are being made. Why have they not ran in and removed this child again, and this time permanently, from the useless care of his parents? Now, on April the 17th, 2019, Eva Hernandez also calls the hotline. She says, listen, Noah's thinner, he's really intimidated, he's really scared. And his caseworker, Susan Johnson, goes and visits the family and she sees that Noah's got a visible scab on his arm and also he's got a bruise on his back. Juarez just explains it away, says that he's fallen off his brother's bunk bed, which of course these things happen in normal households. Kids get bruised, and I guess for the caseworker it would make sense, but she's looking at all the past problems and is starting to form a picture that there is something deeply problematic happening to Noah at that home. She then speaks, as a good caseworker would, to the child by himself, and note that, because that's what you're meant to do. You don't interview a child in front of the parents because often that child is petrified and will say whatever they've been coached to say. So she speaks to him and initially he says there's nothing wrong with his book, but then he adds to it that his dad doesn't call him bad names and that he loves his parents. He also went on to say to her that when he does something wrong, he gets hit. But then when she questions him further about that, he says he doesn't get hit. But even though he's saying these things, which are affirming that his care is okay at home, if you actually analyse what he's saying, it's deeply concerning. No child, unprompted, says, my dad doesn't call me bad names. Because no child on God's earth who's in a loving situation is being called bad names. They don't need to defend that possibility because it's not in their line of reference. Also, the fact that he then says that he does get hit when he does something wrong, but then changes that story, means it's likely he's being coached on exactly what to say. And when you're a young child, you are going to say whatever your primary caregivers are threatening you to say because the consequences are going to be bad for you otherwise, particularly if these terrible things that other people assume are happening to him are indeed happening. Now, the next day after that interview, on April the 18th, 2019, Susan is really worried. She's deeply concerned as his caseworker. She referred Noah to the Child Protection Hotline for an emergency response. At this point, Maggie Vasquez Ducos, who's an emergency response worker with the DCFS, she gets assigned to investigate the claims of abuse against Noah. And basically, it's her job to determine whether the allegations could be substantiated. She goes ahead, arranges for a medical exam, but at this medical, it was actually determined that this bruising could have been caused by falling off the bunk bed, as Juarez and Noah himself had reported. So therefore, the allegations of abuse were found to be inconclusive, which I would say is deeply unsatisfactory when we think about what's gone on so far. Now, in May 2019, Eva once again reports that Cuatro had actually beaten up Juarez in front of their children, and often he'd throw them out into the front garden. He'd throw them outside the house, full stop. So these children are now growing up in a witnessing situation that, again, is completely incongruent to what they need as children. The very fact that Eva has witnessed this kind of abuse taking place, it demonstrates those children are not safe. The fact that this abuse is clearly endemic in the family is deeply concerning and should have DCFS immediately wanted to take action. Now, in addition to these reports of abuse, Juarez and Cuatro aren't attending any parent-child interaction therapy. That had been literally ordered as a condition for Noah being returned to them, and they're just not going. The whole premise of that was they needed to help them develop the bond with their son that was lacking. They'd also not enrolled Noah in preschool, and that was another condition that they'd chosen to ignore. These individuals have no concern whatsoever regarding the rules that they are meant to follow. And that shows that they have no consequential thinking. And when you have no consequential thinking, particularly in line with something as important as keeping the custody of the child that apparently you want to have custody of, well, with respect, it demonstrates that you haven't the capacity, because you would know that apparently by failing to go ahead and follow this protocol that's been put out there for you, the consequence will be that you will lose that custody. And that's exactly what should have happened in this case, because my God, the one thing that Noah needed was for protocol to be followed and for him to be removed. But I wouldn't be telling this story if that had happened. Now, Susan Johnson, on May the 13th, 2019, she files a report of 26 pages. That caseworker is doing everything in her power to ensure that that child is removed because she knows he's not safe. She requested that Noah was taken out of his parents' home because he was in a very precarious situation. That request was granted by a judge authorising his removal. So the right thing happens. She puts forward this very lengthy, very detailed and very relevant report. A judge reads it, authorises his removal, but sadly, in spite of that, it's never followed through. So Susan Johnson's done everything right. The judge has done everything right. But in spite of it, it isn't acted on, and he's left in the care of his abusive parents. So on the 20th of May 2019, Vasquez Ducos, along with Elizabeth Hernandez-Aviles, who is a Home and Services aide, they end up going and seeing Noah with his family. Now, bear in mind, this court order's happened, he's meant to be removed. And they go, in spite of this, to listen to the claims of the family. And the abusive parents just deny what's happened. They say all this mistreatment that we're meant to have done hasn't occurred. All these things that are being reported about us are completely untrue. We deny any of these issues. Bear in mind, at this point, Noah actually has an injury on his cheek, and when they're questioned about how he's got it, they give 3 different stories of how it happened. So they are literally asking them about this situation and how he's got the bruise. And in that event, when they're being interviewed about it, they can't even stick to one story then. So one of the answers was that a child had rubbed salt and ice on him at a birthday party, which is ludicrous. Noah basically said it was a bug bite. So he explains, no, I've just had a bug bite. Cuatro says he'd fallen and had had ointment for it from the doctor. So there are all these conflicting stories about how this one bruise has arrived. And the fact that no one has the same story is because no one's been prepped regarding what to say. And now they're falling apart when they're actually being questioned on it. That should be a big red flag, full stop. But no. Lisbeth actually reported that things Noah was saying to them did seem at the time to be coached. So in that meeting, Lisbeth said, you know what? It did feel a little bit like Noah was saying what he felt he was meant to say. So he kept unprompted saying things like, they feed me a lot. They love me. They take good care of me. I mean, that is the very basic, isn't it, of being a caring adult in the life of a child, that you feed them and that you love them and that you take good care of them. But this child is doing it in an unprompted way because he's being told, you tell them, if anybody comes, we feed you a lot, we love you, we take good care of you, meaning they do none of that. Because no kid who is being brought up in a loving home needs to be coached. It's just second nature, it's what happens. A secure child won't elect to say those things, it's just something they expect. That's the beauty of being a child in a loving environment. You just expect to be fed. You just expect to be loved. In fact, you're surprised if you don't feel that for a moment because you're so used to it. It is the exception, not the rule. Now, during that same visit, Juarez also tells them that she isn't pregnant. Just bear that in mind. So she tells them that she isn't pregnant because she's questioned as to whether she is, and she just confirms, no, I'm not pregnant. She's a massive liar. You'll realise that further and further as I keep telling this story. Now, though Susan Johnson had been fighting at this point to remove Noah from the custody of his abusers, and as I said, had managed to secure the court order to do this, on May the 22nd, 2019, she gets removed from his case. She literally gets taken off the case to protect Noah. And the reason for this is because Vasquez Ducos accuses Johnson of being biased against Juarez and Cuatro. In fact, she said that she was harassing the family and that she had an agenda. So Vasquez Ducos argues against the removal order. Apparently, they said that the burden of evidence had not been met to remove Noah, as all of the claims of the abuse hadn't yet fully been investigated. However, if that was the case, then why had the order been approved? Makes no sense whatsoever. So at this point, they tried to withdraw the order for Noah's removal, but they are clearly unable to do so because it's already been approved by the court. End of. Case closed. Needs to be removed. But no. This arrogant worker decided not to act on it. Instead, they agreed to facilitate a child and family team meeting. Now, bear in mind, that's not protocol. They can't do that. The child has to be removed, but no. This particular worker believes that bias has occurred and is more concerned about listening to the needs of the parents as opposed to thinking about protecting the child. So even though they then try to schedule the meeting with the family, the actual attempts to do so are unsuccessful because, you know, neither of these abusive parents want to engage because they're abusive sociopaths. End of. It's shocking. The protocol for these court orders is that the DCFS have 10 days in which to take Noah away from his parents' house. 10 days. You don't get to do a child family meeting. You don't get to overrule and overturn the court orders. You stick to the protocol, particularly when a 26-page report has been put before a judge and the judge has said this child needs removing for his safety. And also the court should be told within 10 days if he hadn't been removed, but they weren't informed. It's also required that a doctor should have checked him over as a result of the court order, and guess what? That didn't happen either. Now, if necessary, they could have actually called the police. The police could have forcefully entered the home to remove Noah. So if there was any resistance, all of that could have been resolved. In fact, the Antelope Valley Times reported that in the first half of 2019, around 5,000 warrants had been issued in the area to remove children from their homes, and only 2 were not acted on. One of those was Noah. That failure to act, that failure to provide the adequate protection for that little boy, that gorgeous child, had tragic consequences. It seemed that Vasquez Ducos had some racial prejudice towards the caseworker. That's the only way I can say it. That she looked at that caseworker and was like, you don't understand the background of these parents. And that's what's creating this bias. That's why you're acting like this child needs to be taken away. It's got nothing to do with the horrific history of abuse. It's got nothing to do with that. It's because you're stereotyping them. It's like she totally bought in to the manipulative lies of the sociopathic mother who said, why would we hurt our baby when we just got him back? I've had this case open for 4 years and I've been told I'm good enough to only have my 2 kids, but not Noah. How does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because you were massively abusing Noah. You were horribly abusive to your other kids. We'll hear about that later, but you were horribly abusive to Noah to the degree where people noticed it. That's why. Because you are a sociopathic, horrific human being. You don't even deserve the term mother. Sociopath you can have. Mother you don't deserve. So Vasquez Ducos actually wrote in a case notes that Noah's mother had tears rolling down her face as she protested, I don't trust the department. No, you wouldn't trust the department because you did have Susan Johnson, who is actually a good caseworker, who was holding you to account. Unfortunately, she was removed from the case because another worker believed that there were racial biases that were leading to her decisions, as opposed to professional standards and conduct that was appropriate to the role. That's what Susan Johnson was doing. It's heinous what occurs in this case, because we're talking about that worker believing an abusive parent over a professional who was really doing her job. And there was an actual administrator who wanted Johnson replaced with the caseworker who spoke Spanish, which is ludicrous because there was literally no valid reason for that. Noah's family were Latino and English speaking, and they've been born in the States. There was no need for a Spanish person to come on board. They were perfectly capable of having communication in the English language. I mean, that never happened. So this meant that no one was really looking after the case. In fact, it was left down to Vasquez Ducos, who wasn't even a caseworker. Now suddenly she's the person in charge of protecting him, which is something that she's already failed to do from the get-go. On June the 6th, 2019, unbelievably, Juarez had another little boy. She said that she wasn't pregnant. She didn't actually receive any care during the pregnancy because she said that she absolutely wasn't pregnant. She claimed on numerous occasions that she hadn't been pregnant. And she literally attempted to sneak out of the hospital with the baby. Also, she told a story when she gave birth that she was a surrogate. Of course, she didn't actually have any evidence that she was a surrogate. She didn't have any paperwork because there's a big legal reality to becoming a surrogate parent. And she is doing her best to escape the system fully. She doesn't even want them to be aware that she's had a baby because she knows what that could potentially mean. It means the eyes of child services on her yet again because she is completely unfit to be a mother. Fortunately, a social worker is informed, but nonetheless, in spite of all the problems regarding who she is as a mother, all the lies that she's told, she's still allowed to take the baby home. Now, it's also highlighted at this point that Juarez had undergone a psychiatric assessment, and it was found that she, I kid you not, had traits of a sociopath. Now, I appreciate that a lot of you will understand what the term sociopath means or psychopath means, but I'm just going to go through it because I think it's really important to highlight just how dangerous this kind of a person could be when it comes down to caring for a child. So a sociopath is an individual who's diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder or ASPD. It's a mental health condition that's characterized by a really pervasive pattern of disregard, usually for the rights of others, a lack of empathy for people around them. Often they have a tendency towards manipulative and deceitful behaviors. Tick, 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 tick. We're getting all of those, aren't we? When you think about the key traits of a sociopath, it means you're going to have a lack of empathy, you're going to be very manipulative, you're going to be irresponsible, you can be aggressive at times. You'll have a disregard for the expected social norms. You won't care when you do something horrible to somebody. As a parent, that'll mean that you are significantly impaired when it comes down to your parenting style. You won't care about your children's development as you should do. You're likely going to struggle to form genuine emotional bonds with your kids. And that means that you're likely to have a more cold and distant relationship. As parents, they'll often use manipulation to control the children, and they'll make an environment where that child looks for their approval, but often won't receive it. So the child is constantly in a state of flux and constantly fearful in their environment. So when it comes down to how a sociopathic parent would be, well, first of all, you're going to struggle to form emotional bonds that are genuine. It means that you'll have a lack of empathy. It means that you'll be cold and distant. Often you'll control your children through manipulation. You'll make it very difficult for that child to sense when they are loved and approved of. So it will feel very conditional to them. The only way they'll get love and approval of you is if they are doing what you want them to do. You know, you won't love them during their bad times or challenging times. You'll tend to be very neglectful and inconsistent in your care. You'll be unreliable as a parent. You won't provide the appropriate care and support for your kids. Also, as a parent, you'll be really impulsive and irresponsible. So that means you'll be neglectful often as a parent. And those children will often be exposed to illegal, unethical behaviours, and they'll often have a very poor understanding of societal norms because their parents are acting in a way that is not following those societal norms. So if you grow up with a sociopathic parent, it's often going to lead that child to having emotional and psychological issues. They'll often have anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. They'll have real problems in forming healthy relationships. Sociopathic parents very rarely respect their children's boundaries, and that means that kids grow up not understanding trust and autonomy because of what's happened to them in their childhood. And due to the aggressive nature of the sociopathic parent, the lack of remorse of the sociopathic parent, it means that they're very often very abusive, both physically and emotionally, to those children. So just to conclude for you guys, if you have a sociopathic parent, it means that it's going to have an impact profoundly on the child's development and well-being. It's crucial that any child being brought up by a sociopath is given the appropriate support and intervention from other caregivers or professionals to mitigate the impact of the horror of being brought up by a sociopathic individual. They know she has traits of a sociopath, but apparently Noah is still safe in her care, even though she's fully lied about being pregnant again to avoid any involvement by child services. Can I be any more clear about the kind of parent we're dealing with in this moment? So with this all in mind, on June the 18th, 2019, it's reported that there was a very high risk score for Noah. This is according to a structured decision-making questionnaire that is meant to determine whether it's safe for a child to stay with their parents. The caseworker wrote, there are current concerns for the mother's mental health. Now, Vasquez Ducos, who's effectively tasked with being the caseworker, she says that she's going to try to see Noah, but she also evidences at this point that her relationship with the family are fraying. Because they don't want any involvement even from her, this woman who has bought into all this BS about how terrible the family have been treated by child services. So she writes, the mother is threatening me at the moment and is not happy with me. Therefore, I don't know if she'll comply or allow for me to see the children. She writes that in an email. She actually puts it in writing. Now, surely her concern should be Noah, not whether parents want to see her. Lynn, who's her supervisor, actually echoed the same sentiments and said, as of now, the mother is resistant to contact and I'm unsure if she will let us in the door at this point. You know what? You got a court order. Knock the door down. Very simple. Now, despite the fact that there's also been an allegation of sexual abuse for which DCFS policy requires a forensic exam, and despite the court order ordering a medical or sexual abuse exam, none had occurred. Now, one supervisor, somebody called Robinson Moody, they told Vasquez Ducos that she would highly recommend a forensic exam. But to Vasquez Ducos, it seemed that no exam was necessary. She basically pointed to a forensic exam that had happened 2 months prior to this suggestion that he needed another, saying that it was plausible that Noah's bruises had come from the bunk bed incident, and she asserted that there were no allegations of sexual abuse, despite an allegation literally the prior month that DCFS had categorised as sexual abuse. To Vasquez Ducos, however, apparently it seemed that no examination was necessary. And again, she said in an email that there'd been an examination 2 months earlier and there had been no findings, therefore it wasn't required to follow this up further. It's ludicrous. She was being advised that absolutely they were concerned about potential physical and sexual abuse, but no, she saw herself as the person who could make that decision, and she decided that no further action needed to be taken, even though, as I've already noted, Noah was meant to be removed from the family's care. We get to June the 28th, 2019. This is when Vasquez Ducos visits Noah. In her notes, she actually writes that he appeared well in spirits. What does that even mean? He appeared well in spirits. Can we be clear here? He was emaciated, he was terrified, he was being horribly abused, but he appeared well in spirits. So she's trying to say that in his personality, in his character when she saw him, he was okay. Even though she didn't actually spend any time speaking with Noah alone. Now that's the protocol, that's the interview protocol. She's meant to spend time with him by himself in case he's scared. And then when she actually tries to firm up a meeting that's been long delayed between the parents and DCFS, Cuatro is just really dismissive, saying that she doesn't want any further involvement with the agency, as if she has a right. Gosh, could she be any more sociopathic? That she feels that she has the right to say, no, we don't need any more engagement. Even though my child's had big problems, even though my child has literally been in a position where clearly there's been abuse, even though I've lied about the birth of my new baby, I don't want any more work with you in the agency. Like, she has a right to do that. Now, bear in mind, all the while we have Eva, the great-grandmother, desperate to have a relationship with Noah, and she'd only been permitted to see him once since the previous November, and by now it's July 2019. Now, that's a huge oversight by DCFS, because it had been ordered that visitation timetables should have been arranged for his great-grandmother once he'd been taken out of her care, and it hadn't occurred. They are just letting Noah slip through the holes. It's horrendously. And it's galling to note that on July the 3rd, 2019, Vasquez Ducos actually writes, I feel as a department, we've been picking on this family. She's so blinkered, she's so blinded by her own prejudice as a worker that she can't look at this horrendously abusive situation and see it for what it is. Instead, she has to come down on the side of these horrible parents. So it seems that by early July, the final weeks of Noah's life, the whole focus of the DCFS scrutiny is veered from Noah's parents to those who believed he was endangered. So suddenly, all those family members who are getting in contact saying something terrible is happening to Noah, suddenly Eva, the grandmother in this case, is being viewed as the problem who's causing these unnecessary concerns. Suddenly, the family is conspiring against the parents and saying that this abuse is happening when really it isn't. It's absolute BS. But that worker, Vasquez Ducos, is coming down on the side of believing the abusive parents as opposed to the protective family. We get to July the 5th, the fateful day that none of us should have to even consider because he should have been removed from the care of his abusive parents by this point. Sometime on July the 5th, a neighbour at the Mountain Shadows apartments in Palmdale, where they live, walked by the Cuatro family's apartment and hear a child crying, no daddy, no mummy. I am devastated that I have to state that somebody hears those words. No daddy, no mummy. Because it demonstrates that Noah, who is the victim in this case, is distressed and scared. But more than that, he's begging, no daddy, no mummy. Because he knows what's coming. Emergency services were called in after 6 p.m. Juarez and Cuatro, during this distressing call, claim that Noah's almost drowned in the communal pool at the block of their apartments. When help finally arrives, Noah is in their apartment, and you know what they notice straight away? Because bear in mind, he's apparently drowned. Yeah, Noah's clothes were dry. Also, immediately noticed that mottling is around his neck. That's an indicator that he's been strangled, and he's covered in bruises. And there's also a really large mark on his forehead, but of course, he's almost drowned. Now, immediately the police and paramedics grow suspicious, and firefighter paramedic Chad Sullivan said, Things were just not adding up to what the father had already told us, that the child is down in a pool for over 30 minutes and all of a sudden now he's dry with a pair of tan shorts that weren't even wet. So it's obvious to all of those first responders that this is just a pack of lies from the get-go. But of course, Juarez is wandering around expressing disbelief. And that same first responder said that Juarez was walking around expressing disbelief and Cuatro kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But we all know this is just them trying to save their own skins. I mean, the very fact that they haven't thought about those first responders turning up, realizing that that child isn't even wet, just beggars belief. Even for idiots like this, even for heinous sociopaths like this, you would imagine they'd have thought ahead and recognised that he was meant to at least be wet. But this is how delusional they are. Even though Noah is alive when those first responders arrive, he's in an absolutely critical condition. He ends up getting rushed to Palmdale Regional Medical Center by helicopter. He was then transferred to Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. And Detective Susan Velasquez, who actually came to see Noah in hospital during the investigation, said, you knew in your heart that there was something more that he couldn't tell us, that his body was telling us a story and we needed to figure out what was going on. Doctors and nurses rushed to try to revive the boy, first at Palmdale Regional Medical Center and then later at Children's Hospital, as I said, in Los Angeles. And apparently no family members made it to his bedside. Dr. John Markham said that he was joined by a group of doctors and nurses who literally held Noah's hands in his final moments. He said, we were with him as he left this earth. Imagine being a doctor holding the hand of a child when his parents haven't even been present. What a sad death. Don't get me wrong. His abusers did not deserve to hold his hand as he took his last breath. I am glad that people who showed a shred of care for him in his life were present when he died. Those doctors did more for him in those short moments that they had with him than his parents did from the moment he took his first breath. Noah was pronounced dead in the early hours of the following day on July the 6th. And it was evident from the immediacy of this situation that Juarez and Cuatro's story was lies. Noah clearly hadn't drowned. There was no water in his lungs for a start. His clothes weren't wet. Dr. Carol Berkowitz, who's a UCLA pediatrician, said that Noah had so many injuries, but actually concluded that Noah had died from suffocation and blunt force trauma. They also found rib fractures that had occurred at least 2 weeks before he died, possibly longer. She went on to say that it takes significant force to fracture them, especially to fracture so many ribs and to fracture them on both sides. You can't even begin to imagine the pain Noah would have been in. And also, how many times had he been beaten to actually receive those injuries? How terrified must he have been? It's just taking yourself to that mindset and imagining what we're talking about. We're talking about an infant boy, a child being repeatedly beaten to receive such grave injuries. He must have been living in abject fear, second to second, minute to minute, hour to hour. Dr. Lawrence Neugen also verified the same as what Berkowitz testified. He's a LA County medical examiner and he found bony deposits on a few of Noah's ribs, and that showed again that older fractures had since healed. He said that this would have been considered a chronic injury. Also, he found that there were signs of sexual abuse. There was trauma on Noah's body, which indicated that that gorgeous little boy had been sodomized. He also found internal injuries, including a lacerated liver. Can't even begin to describe what I think should happen to parents who do this to children. It's tantamount, as far as I'm concerned, to deserving being burnt in hell for all of us to see. It is heartbreaking and breathtaking that beautiful children like this end up in the grip of these kind of monsters. On September the 27th, 2019, Juarez and Cuatro were arrested. The details were obvious. It was clear their story was a lie, and it was also clear that they were responsible for Noah's death. On the 30th of September, they were both charged formally with the torture and murder of Noah. It was alleged that Cuatro had beaten Noah and Juarez had permitted the child to be injured and harmed, and that the injury had indeed resulted in death. Noah's lovely great-grandmother Eva, she went ahead and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Department of Children and Family Services. She alleged that Noah's death was able to occur despite numerous reports of abuse to the DCFS, and that the social workers then made threats against her in an attempt to silence her. So instead of protecting Noah and his siblings, DCFS continued to place the children with their abusive parents, where the children continued to be abused over the course of several years. And it was argued that they had willfully ignored the court order to remove Noah from the custody of his parents, and that Eva then had also claimed that, as I noted, DCFS had threatened her. Actually said that if she spoke publicly about what had happened, that she wouldn't be granted custody of Noah's siblings. How unbelievable. This woman, who has only ever extended great care to this child, was threatened that if she went public with the reality of what had happened, she wouldn't be given custody of that child's siblings. So Eva had begun the process of adopting Noah's sister and two brothers, and they were telling her all the while that they had been horribly abused at the hands of their parents and that they had witnessed terrible abuse as well. In fact, Noah's older brother said he had been forced to personally beat Noah up, that he was terrified of his dad, who would also punch him and hit him with his belt. This older brother said that he'd seen his father slap his youngest brother, and that all the children were always desperately hungry. And DCFS were threatening Eva that if she was going and talking about this, they'd prevent her getting custody of those children. What is going on with DCFS? And then to add insult to injury, in 2021, the former director of DCFS, Bobby Cagle, he said that though it's very difficult for the public to understand, that he was confident that the decisions that were made were the right ones, and that he thought his staff actually carried out the process well. Right, let's just go through that. So Bobby Cagle, who was in charge, is basically saying that you and I, we struggle to get our little tiny brains wrapped around why this has happened, because it's difficult for us to understand, even though the decisions that were made were right. So we're the ones with the problem. Sorry, Bobby? Yes, it's very difficult for you with your tiny little brains to understand why we did what we did. But you just have to trust that the staff made all the right decisions. It's just that you're a bit stupid. You're the public. You're a bit stupid. There's a child dead. It's an awkward scenario for me to try to explain why that would be correct and you're assuming that the child died. And I'm just saying, if I just keep saying things like, we did the right thing, it'll all be okay in the end, but just keep speaking. Bobby Cagle, you're making no sense, and we're saying that that's because it's nonsense, and that's because your processes and protocol weren't followed. Your own protocol wasn't followed, and essentially now a child's dead, and it's your fault, and your workers' fault. Yeah, and I'm saying that you don't understand because you have tiny little brains. The public are a bit stupid, and we're hoping you're that stupid that if we keep saying stuff, in the end, you'll just agree with us. Honestly, it's ludicrous. Confident the decisions that were made were the right ones. A kid died. Confident that his staff carried out the processes well, a kid's dead. There was no carrying out anything well. What an absolutely delusional idiot. God, I hope he watches this video. Can I just state that again for the record? You are an absolutely delusional idiot. I've watched you interviewed. You should not be allowed within 1,000 foot of a vulnerable child. It's one thing to get something so wrong, but to stand clearly by the decisions that were so wrong is ludicrous. He obviously didn't want to admit that they were at fault. He obviously wanted to act like he could patronise us, and my God, he sounds so condescending, trying to justify his actions and their actions. Anyone with a basic comprehension can understand exactly what decisions were wrong in this case. What an absolute POS. Honestly, I want to get him, I want to shake him for a while, and I want to say this is why children keep dying, because you don't accept wrongdoing. You don't accept responsibility for your mistakes. You consistently stand by terrible realities that end up with lives like Noah's being lost, and you do not ever bear witness to that reality. Instead, you shove your head right up your own behind and just act like the world is shiny and everything's fine. And you leave people like Eva and those who love this little boy to pick up the pieces of your mistakes. How dare you? How dare you? It was argued basically that the death could not have been predicted, even though it was predicted. Michael Nash, who actually worked for the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, said, "You went from virtually no physical abuse to the worst kind possible. The child was murdered." Rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. That is a lie. It's a lie. The fact that he's saying it went from 0 to murder is just not true, as I've evidenced in what I've told you today. They could see this happening. The caseworker who was taken off the case was deeply concerned. The judge who said he needed to be removed, who did the right thing, who was ignored, they could see this coming, but apparently there wasn't any evidence of previous abuse and neglect. There was loads of evidence. All he did in that statement was minimise it by saying virtually none. That's wishful thinking. That's not true. And it's so disrespectful when you have statements like this put out. If we just go through a few of the things that were massive failures. Well, first of all, in the months before Noah's death, they ignored the removal order. So DCFS did not act on that court order where Noah should be removed from home. They disregarded the court order for a medical exam. Also, they didn't care that the family weren't engaging, so the parents repeatedly failed to comply with the terms of their custody agreement. All this was happening, and yet apparently nobody could see it coming. Apparently there weren't any issues. Apparently it was a big surprise. Also, the fact that they had cited that Noah's mother showed traits of a sociopath. Apparently these are all fine. We couldn't see any of this happening. Having a child with an abusive family, with a parent who's a sociopath, who failed to engage with any of the things that we organise. Oh, it's not our fault at all. It is absolutely part of the shortcomings of the agency that led to the death of Noah. If they'd listened to the court order, he would still be alive. DCFS are disgusting in this case. They are shameful. The DCFS, of course, released a statement and said, at any given time, the Department of Children and Family Services serves more than 34,000 families and vulnerable children in Los Angeles County with an unwavering commitment to pursue child safety every day in our communities. Quote, well, that's not true. Noah's dead. Word salad. You can keep saying it, but if what you're turning up is dead kids, you're not doing it. They should hang their heads in shame. And I mean that with every word, every letter that I state when I'm discussing this case. And I don't know what relevance the number of people they have to serve does with Noah's death. Are they trying to say that they failed because they were busy? Oh, I'm sorry. You know, we were just a little bit too busy to save that child. Yeah, we can only save some children. So we just decided that he could die. As if numbers and busyness provide an excuse for the horrific abuse and murder of a child. It's terrifying that they're using these excuses. It is scary to think how many people that they're supposed to help when they've handled this case so badly. So as opposed to defending themselves, they're just highlighting how harrowing it is for us. Because if they can let him slip through the net, how many others are slipping through the net? How many others will I cover on this channel? Now, in March 2024, Jose Cuatro pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and torture, and Ursula Juarez pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and torture. Juarez cried as she left court. Of course she did. She's a sociopath. She feels sorry for herself. Deputy District Attorney Jonathan Hatami called them crocodile tears, and he's right. He said that she was feeling sorry for herself because she knows she's going to prison and that she had never shown any remorse because she's a massive, great, big sociopath at the highest level and also, in my opinion, a child murderer. On April the 30th, 2024, their sentencing took place. The prosecution said that Jose Cuatro targeted Noah unbelievably because he thought that he was not his biological son. He was, by the way, but he decided that he wasn't. Apparently, he knows how to do some kind of genetic testing without any kind of science behind it whatsoever. Just a thought, just a feeling. He's not my son. Why? I just feel it, so he's not my son. I'm just going to treat him accordingly because he's not my son. He basically apparently believed that he had sickle cell anemia, despite Noah not actually being diagnosed with this, and he reportedly considered this to be a disease that black people get. So he thought that his father must have been black, and that was enough leverage for him to go ahead and kill his child. Bear in mind, a DNA test confirmed that he was actually Noah's father, but it isn't amazing the mental gymnastics these predators will use to get to a position where they're allowed to abuse their child. The court heard that Juarez had actually sent a text which read, "Almost killed him so many times, I had to do CPR for him to wake up and stay alive, right?" Oh my God, what I would like to do to Juarez is not allowed on this channel. I cannot believe that they could write that in a text and feel like they deserve to take another breath on this planet. I genuinely don't get it. Talking about a child and writing, "I almost killed him so many times, I had to do CPR for him to wake up and stay alive." How horrific. How does anybody exist with a conscience just negligible? Susan Johnson, the one good person in this particular case, she testified saying that nobody in her history had ever taken her off a case like that before, and that she literally couldn't believe it. She said that in the meeting where she was taken off Noah's case, she'd actually tried to fight against it, but her supervisor was basically elbowing her, indicating for her to stop talking. And she said that she basically said she didn't want a dead kid on her watch. After that meeting, she'd even emailed her supervisor saying, "They seem not to believe that my concerns are valid." And Keith Glynn, a supervisor who was present in that meeting, said that Vasquez Ducos was basically better able to articulate her viewpoint, and went on to say that the DCFS wanted to follow the practice model, which involved looking more at the positives than the weaknesses in the family. So basically, don't concentrate on the reality of all the abuse, concentrate on all the positives in the family, such as the fact that the person opens the door. What a pile of BS. So in the months leading up to Noah's death, this signature policy had been implemented by the LA County Board of Supervisors. So that ex-director, Bobby Cagle, that I talked about earlier on, who was like, "Everything was fine, we did nothing wrong," he peddled this particular policy, which was in line apparently with a national movement calling for a less adversarial approach to parents, a respect for diversity, and a shift in focus away from the family's weaknesses and towards its strengths. So PC bollocks once again. Let's not actually notice that people are being terrible with their kids. Let's instead concentrate on whether it's acceptable to have negative viewpoints towards those parents based on their backgrounds, ethnicities, etc. It's rubbish. It doesn't matter whether you are black, white, yellow, green, blue, multicolored, who cares? What matters is what you're doing with your child. And if there happens to be a particular racial group who are having more children taken off them because there are problems in the family, maybe it's time to look at how to help them change the way they are towards their kids. Don't go, "Oh, let's not see it, let's not look at it." Look directly at it and challenging it. If you have a problem with a particular racial group, it's because there's a problem in the particular racial group. It's not the bias, it's the issue that's endemic within it. And that is not anything to do with racism. It's everything to do with the safeguarding and protection of children. And I find it deeply disturbing that people will look less in certain directions because they believe that it's not politically correct. Any good person from any racial group, no matter what it is, wants children protected. That's all that matters in these situations. We are losing our minds. We are failing in society if we do not do what is right because we wish to protect some kind of political ideology or agenda. It is disgusting. A statement from Eva, the lovely great-grandmother in this case, was read in court. She said, "Why? My God, why is there such evil in you, Ursula? What kind of a monster are you, Jose? You're both very sick. You are the worst kind of sickos." She also went on to say that she hoped that neither of them would ever be freed from prison. She said that Cuatro was no longer human, but an evil monster. Judge Robert Chu sentenced Cuatro to 32 years to life in prison and sentenced Juarez to 22 years to life. He described Noah's death as a devastating loss, commenting that he could feel the love of Noah's family and was sure that he would never be forgotten. But they're just words, really, aren't they? The people who have the gaping wound in their life are those people who fought hard to have Noah safe and didn't achieve that goal because the DCFS literally failed so badly. Speaking of Noah, prosecutor John Hattatme said, "At least his voice was heard. I believe he's in heaven, and I believe at least people see he mattered. These two individuals will now spend the rest of their lives in prison. Tom Lackey, state assemblyman, said, Noah was not only betrayed by his parents, but the network established to protect children from mistreatment also failed. Eva went on to describe that gorgeous little boy as being a bright little boy who was beautiful and so loving. He had so much charisma, such character. He wanted to stop and speak to anybody, wherever they want. Every day whilst he was living with her, he would say, Grandma, do you know what time it is? It's time for you to hold me and tell you you love me. Oh, just heartbreaking, isn't it? Child cases which involve abuse are always heartbreaking, and there are many where those cases have slipped under the radar and this terrible thing has happened to a child that no one knew was being abused. That occurs. It's terrible. It's an awful indictment of our society, but it's true. But I think what's really devastating about this case is that abuse had been reported time and time again. And someone that Noah loved and who desperately wanted custody of him kept trying to do what was right for him. And despite all of this, he ended up being killed at the hands of his evil parents. And I use that word accurately and appropriately. They are evil monsters. The absolute failings of the services which were supposed to protect him are all the more apparent due to this. His death was 100% preventable. It shouldn't have happened, full stop. And I know that no child should ever die. But in this case, there were so many red flags. There was a court order. He should have been removed. At the time of his death, he should have been in foster care. There was an order allowing for his removal from the abusive home. How DCFS can stand by their actions in this case is disgusting. And this is in the same area, let me tell you, where Gabriel Fernandez and Anthony Avalos were also failed. This is an area where failure is endemic in the services. If you know this case and you've heard about it before, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I know it's harrowing, but I wanted to cover it because Noah matters. I wanted to cover it because Noah's voice needs to be heard, because these kind of systemic failures are beyond me. It isn't all right to say it's a numbers game. You know, a few kids are going to die because we can't be bothered to follow the protocol and processes to protect them. This case highlights that even when those processes are followed, workers who should know better can get in the way and contribute to the needless murder of a child. It's horrified me, this case, for so many reasons that I'm sure you'll agree with. Let me know your thoughts as ever, guys, and this video is 1,000,000% dedicated to that beautiful boy with the gorgeous smile, Noah. Fly high, sweetheart. Where you are now is where you deserve to be, drenched in love. And my God, I hope everybody in this case who did less than hangs their heads in shame. And I hope that Noah stains their conscience. And if he doesn't, well, just like his mother, they're sociopaths too. See you again next time. Be safe.